All right, glad I cleared that up. Why don't we introduce today's political panel now? And joining us, Green Senator for South Australia, Barbara Pocock is back with us. Barbara's in Adelaide. Good to see you again, Barbara. And right here in the studio in Parliament House in Canberra, Nationals Deputy Leader Perrin Davey. Welcome, Senator. Good to see you here too, Perrin. Since you were present in the room, Barbara, I might go to Perrin first of all around the royal visit. You can declare your Republican tendencies if you wish, Perrin.
I shan't be declaring any such thing. I'm a proud monarchist, and it was an absolute honour to be in the room and to hear from His Majesty King Charles III. It was great. His affection for Australia, he was very respectful, honouring our First Nations people and acknowledging their custodianship of our great country, but also the importance of our modern democracy and our modern multiculturalism in Australia as we strive forward and look at the challenges of the future, including climate change.
I might pull apart elements of that speech. Barbara, I'm hoping you got to absorb at least those set-piece contributions that were made in the Great Hall, even though we find you there in Adelaide, and perhaps you managed to catch the leaking audio that came through on the live broadcast from your former colleague Lydia Thorpe. In line or out of line, do you think, by that senator?
Well, I think Senator Thorpe clearly can speak for herself, as she has today. But yes, for myself, I'm a strong Republican, and I think, the monarchy symbolises in many ways an earlier era. Certainly when bigger crowds came out and many Australians paid attention. These days we see a very different reception. We see, for example, that state premiers aren't coming to Canberra. We see, many Australians who wish no ill will towards the royal family are not interested in the royal family. They're very much focused on the issues in their own lives, cost of living, housing, climate change, as Perrin mentioned, things that really deserve our attention. And certainly many First Nations people for whom the colonial legacy is a sad and sorry story that they want to talk about. They want to talk about the truth of that history, the way in which First Nations people are asking us to do truth-telling. Very important part of where we need to look now, not back to an earlier era, but forward to our own independent Australian head of state. That's what we need to look to.
Yeah, so for those reasons that you just outlined there, Barbara, do you resent or object to the trappings and the tour? It comes at considerable expense, I'm going to suggest, even though we don't know how much. There's a lot goes into this. Would you prefer it hadn't happened?
No, I'm not resentful about it, but I do think it's the wrong thing to be focusing on right now. And I would rather see a Labor Party that focused on our Republican future. And I think even the King has recognised that it's time, Australians, our future is in our own hands. Let's have the courage to take that future and shape it in an Australian image. This possibly will be the last country on earth that still, tips our cap to a British king. It's not the way a sensible, self-governing nation should be thinking about its future. We are better than that. We are more independent than that, and it's time we moved on, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of many Australians.
Well, you're more explicit about it, Barbara Pocock, than some in the government right now, who I know to be dyed-in-the-wool Republicans, but they don't really want to be so explicit about that. Perrin, on Lydia Thorpe's outburst or statements, you were in the room. Did everyone absorb what she was trying to say?
I think most people in the room who had witnessed her enter the room and who have experience working with Lydia, were not surprised by her outburst. It was unfortunate, and I think she could have been escorted out of the room a bit faster. I think there's a time and a place, and we certainly, we have seen protests as the royal tour has occurred, which have been by and large very respectful protests. And we have that right, but for her to try and interrupt the formal proceedings was unfortunate, and I think was handled, though, very very well by the security involved.
Yeah, look, for a sense of perspective, it was, by my reckoning, about 10 seconds worth of commentary in a program with set-piece speeches that went significantly longer. Climate change, Barbara Pocock, the King actually went there in ways that I hadn't fully anticipated, because listening to his mother, the late Queen, she tended not to put any political matter into her speeches. Notwithstanding what you've said about the King's visit with the Queen, would you at least welcome the fact that this is an area of passion and policy commitment for him?
Yes, certainly. He's had a long interest, and he reads the science, and he's certainly in his own practice as a gardener and a person with a real interest in trees, in botany and so on. He cannot, like many of us, turn away from what the science is telling us, and he's visiting countries very regularly that are feeling the effects of climate change. So it's an important thing to be talking about in all of our public events, because people are paying a huge price not only in our own country with floods and fire and all the other consequences, but internationally and in many countries with low national income, trying to cope with the effects. So very important that we talk about it in every form of public discussion.
All right, let's move on to some domestic politics now. Perrin Davey, housing. Everyone's getting in on the Act. The Coalition had a $5 billion policy announcement over the weekend. To a similar end, the Business Council of Australia has a big manifesto out at the moment that really is about rewarding the states to crack on here. Well, states and territories, to be precise. They're talking at the Business Council about a $10 billion fund worth of incentives. Is that all it's going to take? Just a bit of a carrot to the states and territories to do things they're not currently doing?
Well, I mean, it is one of the biggest issues that we have and we find is federally we can't turn a sod. So federally we can provide support, we can provide incentives, but it is up to the state governments to play a very important role. But because they haven't, and because Labor have been dragging the chain, that is why the policy that Peter Dutton announced on the weekend to provide funding for enabling infrastructure is so vitally important. I was out just last week in the local government areas of West Wyalong, Parks and Forbes and Lake Macquarie City Council area, and each and every one of these councils raise with me the fact that they have greenfield sites ready to go, they have developers ready to come in, but they can't afford, and they're small, shy councils, they can't afford the enabling infrastructure, and we need to get that moving to open these areas up.
It's a real pressure point. I will get a thought from Barbara Pocock before I throw it to you, though, Barbara, for the benefit of our audience watching live. We are watching a picture in the bottom right-hand side of our screens. It might go full frame in just a moment, but to set that out for you, that is Queen Camilla arriving at the base of Black Mountain. This is at the National Botanic Gardens here in Canberra. She will be teaming up with the King very shortly for the planting of another tree there. He is just presently off at a research facility run by the CSIRO. It looks at bushfires and other research work there. So we did promise at the start of this program to keep you updated with live moments. That's that arrival at the Botanic Gardens. More to come from there. Barbara Pocock, on housing, incentive funds, lures for the state and territories to do a lot more and a lot more quickly. $10 billion, says the Business Council. What do you think?
Well, it's really important that we see a focus on housing as the significant crisis that it is right now, and it's good to see Dutton turning his attention to this crisis. But what we need is a lot more than further incentives to developers to get infrastructure in place. What we need is every level of government responding to the crisis. I spent the weekend here in Adelaide walking through the parklands. I have never seen so many tents, so many people cast out of their homes, and of course for every tent there's a woman in a car somewhere. So we are in a very serious serious crisis here in Adelaide and nationally. And yes, we need to make changes of the kind, like improving our infrastructure. But the critical thing is, I think we need to look to our tax policy. We are spending over the next 10 years $176 billion in tax benefits and negative gearing and capital gains discounts to assist investors to compete with those first home buyers in our housing market, pushing up prices and intensifying the crisis. So we can't just look at one little piece, one $5 billion piece. We need a national solution to deal with the biggest crisis in the post-war period for people who are trying to put a roof over their heads.
I hear you, Barbara Pocock. That is shocking to my ears to hear about the tents in sort of inner urban Adelaide, for goodness sake. But look, housing policy, you can bank on the fact that we'll be coming back to it at regular intervals between now and the next election. I do apologise, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Barbara and Perrin, the King and Queen's visit is kind of messing with our schedule a little today, but we got across most of what we had planned to. Barbara Pocock, thank you. Perrin Davey,
thank you
as
very
always,
much.
you're welcome on the
Thank
program.
you, Greg.